The crisp autumn morning brought an unexpected change to the usual routine at Riverside Elementary School. A successful business consultant father had been feeling the weight of guilt lately. His demanding job had kept him away from many precious moments in his daughter's life: her school play, her art exhibition, and even her recent academic award ceremony. Each missed event had left a small crack in his heart, especially when he'd see the brief flash of disappointment in his 8-year-old's eyes, though she always tried to hide it with a brave smile. That morning, after wrapping up an important client call earlier than expected, he made a spontaneous decision. Instead of heading back to his office downtown, he found himself turning his car toward his daughter's school. The familiar building came into view, a sprawling single-story structure with cheerful yellow walls and children's artwork decorating every window. His daughter had proudly pointed out her own drawings during their morning drives, and he could almost hear her excited voice describing each piece. As he walked through the school's main entrance, memories of his own school days flooded back. The squeaking of sneakers on polished floors, the distant sound of children reciting lessons, and that unmistakable cafeteria smell, a mix of cleaning supplies and whatever was on the day's menu. The security guard at the front desk greeted him warmly, checking his ID and issuing him a visitor's badge. "Your daughter will be so happy to see you," she said with a knowing smile. The hallways were quiet except for the occasional burst of laughter from behind classroom doors. He passed by the gymnasium where a physical education class was in full swing, the sound of bouncing basketballs and cheerful shouts spilling out. His daughter loved PE days. She'd often come home full of stories about the games they played and the friends she teamed up with. Walking towards the cafeteria, he checked his watch. 11:45 a.m., right in the middle of her lunch period. His heart beat a little faster with anticipation. He hadn't told anyone about his visit, not even his wife, wanting to make it a complete surprise. In his jacket pocket was a small gift he picked up on his last business trip, a delicate bracelet with tiny butterfly charms that he knew would make her eyes light up. The cafeteria doors loomed ahead, and through the small windows he could see groups of children seated at long tables, their chatter muffled but clearly excited. He took a deep breath, straightening his tie out of habit. In all his important business meetings, he'd never felt quite as nervous as he did now, about to surprise his little girl. Just before pushing open the doors, he paused to observe through the window, trying to spot his daughter among the sea of young faces. The cafeteria was bright and alive with activity, kids trading snacks, sharing stories, and laughing together. Lunch monitors moved between tables, helping open milk cartons and making sure everyone was eating their meals. Finally, he spotted her, seated at a table near the middle of the room, her hair styled in the neat braids his wife had done this morning. She was talking animatedly with her friends, probably sharing one of her famous knock-knock jokes that she loved to practice at home. The sight made him smile. She was so much like him at that age, always the one trying to make others laugh. He pushed the door open slowly, the cafeteria noise washing over him in a wave. A few kids noticed him and watched curiously. Adults visiting during lunch wasn't an everyday occurrence. He moved carefully between the tables, trying not to draw too much attention, wanting to preserve the element of surprise for as long as possible. As he got closer, he could hear snippets of his daughter's conversation with her friends. They were planning what games to play during recess, their excited voices rising and falling with each suggestion. She was so engrossed in the discussion that she didn't notice him approaching, which made his heart swell with affection. He was just a few steps away now, close enough to see the small scuff on her new shoes from playing hopscotch, the sparkly hair clips she'd insisted on wearing this morning, and the way she gestured with her hands while talking, just like her mother. Everything seemed perfect for this surprise reunion, but as he took those final steps closer, something caught his eye that made him stop in his tracks. What he saw next would turn this surprise visit into something entirely unexpected. Standing there in the bustling cafeteria, the father's smile slowly faded as his eyes took in the scene before him. At first, it was subtle, something that might have gone unnoticed by someone less observant or less invested in their child's well-being. But to a parent's eyes, the differences were impossible to miss. The cafeteria was divided into several long tables, each filled with chattering students enjoying their lunch break. His daughter sat with a small group of students at one of the tables near the middle of the room. What caught his attention wasn't just the seating arrangement, but the striking difference in the lunches laid out before them. Most of the students in the cafeteria had trays loaded with warm, freshly prepared meals, steaming portions of what looked like chicken with vegetables, fresh fruit cups, and cartons of milk. The aroma of hot food wafted through the air, making the contrast even more apparent. His daughter's table, however, told a different story. He watched as his little girl picked at what appeared to be a hastily assembled cold sandwich. Next to her, her table mates had similar meals, basic items that seemed far less appetizing than what other students were enjoying. His throat tightened as he noticed her glancing longingly at the other tables, though she tried to maintain a cheerful conversation with her friends. The businessman in him kicked in, and he began to observe more systematically. His eyes tracked the lunch line, watching as different students received their meals. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Students of certain backgrounds consistently received different treatment, being directed to specific lines or handed pre-made meals instead of the hot lunches others received. His daughter hadn't noticed him yet, and for a moment he was grateful. It gave him time to collect himself, to process what he was seeing without alarming her. He watched as she shared her cookie with a friend who had an even smaller lunch, his heart swelling with pride at her generosity even as it ached at the injustice of the situation. The lunch monitor, a woman he recognized as one of the teachers, moved between the tables. Her behavior seemed routine, practiced, suggesting this wasn't a one-time occurrence but an established pattern. She barely glanced at the table where his daughter sat, spending more time chatting with students at other tables, asking if they needed anything additional. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone, discreetly documenting what he saw. Years of business experience had taught him the importance of evidence, of approaching difficult situations with facts rather than just emotions. Through his phone's camera, he captured the stark differences in meal quality, the seating patterns, the systematic way certain students were directed to different lines. A group of kids rushed past him, laughing about something that had happened in class earlier. Their carefree joy stood in sharp contrast to the serious thoughts running through his mind. He noticed how his daughter and her friends spoke in quieter voices, how they seemed to make themselves smaller in the space, less noticeable, behavior no child should have to learn. Other parents had trusted the school with their children's well-being, just as he had. They dropped their kids off each morning believing they would be treated fairly, that they would receive the same care and consideration as any other student. The weight of this trust, now betrayed, settled heavily on his shoulders. He thought about all the times his daughter had come home saying she wasn't very hungry, how she'd started packing extra snacks in her backpack. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture that made his stomach turn. As a father, he felt a deep sense of guilt for not noticing sooner, for not asking more questions when she'd made casual comments about lunch being different some days. The cheerful cafeteria murals seemed to mock the situation, their bright colors and messages about friendship and equality standing in stark contrast to what was actually happening beneath them. A clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second marking time in a system that had failed these children. His daughter finally looked up, her eyes widening in surprise as she spotted him. The bright smile that lit up her face nearly broke him. How could she still be so joyful, so resilient in the face of such unfairness? She raised her hand to wave, but then hesitated, glancing quickly at the lunch monitor, as if seeking permission for this simple gesture. That moment of hesitation, that learned caution in his confident, bright little girl, was what cemented his resolve. This wasn't just about lunch. It was about dignity, equality, and the fundamental right of every child to feel valued and respected in their school. As he finally started walking toward her table, his mind was already racing with the next steps he needed to take. This situation required immediate action, and he knew exactly what he had to do. The father knew he needed to investigate further before taking action. Years of handling delicate business situations had taught him the importance of gathering all the facts. He hugged his daughter warmly, keeping his concerns hidden behind a genuine smile, and told her he'd brought her favorite sandwich from the deli down the street, a small excuse to stay and observe. His daughter's eyes lit up at the treat, but what struck him most was how quickly she tried to share it with her friends. "Can they have some too, Dad?" she whispered, glancing around as if sharing food might get them in trouble. That protective instinct in such a young child spoke volumes about what these kids had been experiencing. As he sat with the children, he carefully engaged them in conversation, using his business skills to ask casual questions that wouldn't raise suspicion. "How's the lunch today?" he'd ask, or "What's your favorite thing they serve here?" The responses were telling: nervous glances, hesitant answers, and stories that painted a disturbing picture of daily life in the cafeteria. One little boy mentioned that his grandmother had complained to the school last month, but nothing changed. Another child explained how they were always told certain foods had run out by the time they got to the lunch line, even though they could see plenty being served to other students. These weren't just isolated incidents. This was a systematic problem. The father noticed the teacher in charge of lunch distribution watching their table with increasing frequency. She seemed uncomfortable with his presence, especially when he pulled out his phone to show his daughter some family photos, while actually documenting the different meals being served around the cafeteria. He excused himself to use the restroom, taking a route that led him past the kitchen area. The setup was revealing. Different meals were clearly pre-sorted, with better quality foods designated for certain lines. He overheard a kitchen staff member questioning this practice, only to be quietly hushed by another employee who said, "That's just how things are done here." Walking back to the cafeteria, he passed the school's mission statement, proudly displayed on the wall: "Every child matters. Every child succeeds." The irony wasn't lost on him. He thought about his own childhood, how his parents had taught him to stand up for what's right, even when it was difficult. Now it was his turn to put those lessons into action. Returning to the lunchroom, he noticed more subtle signs he missed earlier. The way certain students were rushed through the lunch line while others were allowed to take their time. How some children's requests for seconds were granted with a smile, while others were denied without explanation. The pattern was clear and deeply troubling. He watched as his daughter's friend pulled out a small notebook showing her elaborate drawings of the meals she wished she could have. The creativity and resilience of these children, finding ways to cope with unfair treatment, touched his heart deeply. They shouldn't have to be this strong, this adaptable to inequality. A group of students from another table came over to say hello to his daughter, but quickly retreated when the lunch monitor cleared her throat loudly. The subtle intimidation tactics were clear. The children were being conditioned to stay in their designated spaces, to accept their assigned roles in this unfair system. Using his business phone, he began discreetly taking notes, documenting times, patterns, and specific incidents. He noticed how the teacher would intercept certain students before they could reach the main lunch line, redirecting them to a separate area with pre-packaged meals. The discrimination was supple enough to avoid immediate notice, but systematic enough to be undeniable once you started paying attention. The father's mind raced with memories of recent conversations with his daughter. How she'd stopped asking to buy lunch at school, preferring to bring food from home. How she'd mentioned feeling different, but couldn't quite explain why. All the signs had been there, but like many parents, he'd been too busy to connect the dots. As lunch period drew to a close, he watched the cleanup process. Even this was telling. Some tables were given extra time to finish their meals, while others were hurried along, barely getting to finish their already inadequate lunches. The injustice of it all made his blood boil, but he maintained his composed exterior. His daughter hugged him goodbye, her smile bright despite everything. "Thanks for coming, Dad," she said softly. "It made lunch special today." Those simple words strengthened his resolve. This wasn't just about one lunch period or one school. This was about standing up for what's right, about ensuring every child could smile that brightly at lunchtime. Walking toward the exit, he knew exactly what needed to be done. This situation required immediate intervention from authorities who could investigate properly and take decisive action. As he pushed open the heavy school doors, his hand was already reaching for his phone. Sometimes doing the right thing meant making difficult calls, and this was definitely one of those times. After leaving the cafeteria, the father found a quiet corner in the school hallway near the art display. His hands were steady as he pulled out his phone and began reviewing the evidence he'd gathered. The colorful student artwork on the walls around him, paintings of friendship and unity, stood in stark contrast to what he'd just witnessed. His photo gallery told a clear story. The first image showed the standard lunch being served to most students: a hot, balanced meal with fresh vegetables, fruit, and milk. Scrolling through, he found the photos of the alternative lunches given to his daughter's table: basic sandwiches that looked hastily assembled, often with wilted lettuce and processed cheese. More damning were the videos he'd managed to capture. In one clip, you could clearly see the lunch monitor directing different students to different lines. Another showed the stark difference in how requests for second helpings were handled, granted with a smile to some, denied without explanation to others. The pattern was undeniable. He opened his Notes app, where he documented conversations and observations. The timestamp feature would prove crucial. It showed this wasn't just a one-time occurrence, but a systematic practice happening throughout the lunch period. He'd even noted down some of the excuses given. We're out of hot meals, while hot meals continue to be served to other students, and this line is closed, only to reopen moments later for different students. A group of teachers passed by, their voices dropping to whispers when they noticed him. He pretended to be absorbed in a business call, all while continuing to organize his evidence. His years in consulting had taught him the importance of thorough documentation. This wasn't just about one lunch period, this was about changing a system. He pulled up the school district's website on his phone, quickly finding their policies on equal treatment and food service standards. Every line he read made his heart sink further. The school wasn't just violating moral principles, but also clear district guidelines and possibly state regulations. The father then started recording voice notes, describing everything he'd seen while it was still fresh in his mind. He detailed the layout of the cafeteria, the timing of lunch distribution, the visible differences in meal quality, and the subtle ways children were separated and treated differently. His voice remained calm and professional, but anyone listening closely could hear the controlled anger underneath. Opening his email, he began drafting a message to his wife, explaining what he'd discovered. They'd always been partners in handling difficult situations, and he knew she would want to be involved in addressing this. He attached several of the photos he'd taken, making sure to include enough context without compromising any student's privacy. As he worked, a young student walked past, headed to the water fountain. The child's quick, nervous glance in his direction, followed by a hurried return to class, reminded him why this documentation was so crucial. These children had learned to be cautious, to accept unfair treatment as normal, and that thought broke his heart. He reviewed the videos one more time, making sure they clearly showed the systematic nature of the discrimination. In one particularly telling clip, you could see the same lunch monitor who'd been watching his table earlier directing students to different lines based on nothing more than their appearance. The evidence was clear, but he knew he needed to handle this carefully. The father then pulled up his contact list, scrolling through to find the number of a friend who worked in education administration. He needed expert advice on the proper channels for reporting this. While he wanted immediate action, he also wanted to ensure this would be handled in a way that would lead to real, lasting change. Looking at his watch, he realized he'd been gathering and organizing evidence for nearly an hour. The hallway had grown quiet as classes continued, but he could still hear the distant sounds of the cafeteria staff cleaning up after lunch. He thought about all the lunch periods that had come before, all the children who had silently accepted this treatment as normal. His daughter's face flashed in his mind, her brave smile, her quick instinct to share what little she had with her friends. She deserved better. They all deserved better. The school's mission statement about equality and excellence, posted prominently near the front office, now seemed like a cruel joke. Standing up, he straightened his tie and took a deep breath. The evidence was clear and well documented. Now it was time for action. As he walked toward the school's front office, his mind was made up. Some situations required immediate intervention, and this was one of them. He pulled out his phone one last time, knowing that his next call would set in motion events that would change the school forever. Standing in the quiet school hallway, the father's hand trembled slightly as he dialed 911. Years of business experience had taught him about decisive moments, times when you had to take bold action, and this was definitely one of them. As the phone rang, he glanced at the photos on his screen one last time, confirming what he already knew. This situation required immediate intervention. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm and professional. The father took a deep breath, speaking clearly and concisely, just as he would during an important business presentation. He explained the situation: systematic discrimination in the school cafeteria, potential health code violations, and clear civil rights concerns. The operator listened carefully, asking specific questions about the location, the number of students involved, and whether he had observed any immediate health risks. His detailed documentation proved invaluable as he answered each question with precise information. He described the different meals, the segregated serving lines, and the pattern of discrimination he'd witnessed. "Sir, I want you to know we're taking this very seriously," the operator assured him. "I'm dispatching both police officers and health department officials to the school right now. Can you stay on the line with me?" He agreed, his heart racing but his voice steady. This was about more than just one lunch period. It was about standing up for every child who'd been afraid to speak out. While waiting, he heard the distant sound of children laughing during recess. The normalcy of the sound struck him. How many of these children had accepted unfair treatment as just another part of their school day? His daughter's brave smile flashed in his mind again, strengthening his resolve. The operator asked him to wait near the school's main entrance to meet the responding officers. As he walked through the halls, he noticed a few curious glances from staff members. Word was spreading that something was happening, though no one yet knew exactly what. He could hear whispered conversations behind partially closed classroom doors. Just 10 minutes after his call, he heard the first sirens in the distance. The sound grew louder, and soon he could see police cars pulling into the school parking lot through the front windows. The officers approached professionally, their presence commanding but not threatening. Behind them, he spotted health department vehicles arriving. His call had set a full investigation in motion. The father met the first officers at the door, introducing himself calmly. He appreciated their professional approach. They listened carefully as he showed them his documented evidence, taking notes and asking relevant questions. The health department officials joined them, their expressions growing more concerned as they reviewed the photos of the different meals being served. Inside the school office, phones started ringing as word spread about the police presence. The principal emerged from her office, looking confused and alarmed. The father watched as the officers explained the situation to her, noting how her expression shifted from surprise to concern to what looked like genuine shock. More officials arrived, representatives from the school district, additional health inspectors, and civil rights investigators who had been contacted by the police. The father's thorough documentation made their initial investigation much easier. Each photo, video, and noted conversation helped paint a clear picture of what had been happening in the cafeteria. The hallways became busy with activity as officials moved between the cafeteria, kitchen, and administrative offices. The father could hear snippets of conversations about health code violations, civil rights laws, and district policies. What had started as a surprise lunch visit had turned into a full-scale investigation. He thought about his daughter, still in class, unaware of the changes her father's actions were setting in motion. He sent a quick text to his wife, updating her on the situation. Her response was immediate and supportive. "You did the right thing. I'm proud of you." The health inspectors emerged from the kitchen with serious expressions, clipboards full of notes. They had found additional violations beyond just the discriminatory serving practices, issues with food storage, temperature control, and sanitation that put all students at risk. The father's call had unveiled problems that went beyond what even he had initially suspected. Parents began arriving at the school, called by concerned children who had noticed the police presence. The father watched as school officials tried to manage the situation, but the truth was already spreading. Other parents who had suspected something was wrong, but hadn't known how to address it started sharing their own stories. As the afternoon wore on, more officials arrived, school board members, district superintendents, and civil rights attorneys. What had started as one father's concern had snowballed into a full investigation that would reshape the school's entire approach to student treatment and food service. Looking at his phone, he saw messages from other parents, thanking him for taking action. Some shared stories of their own children's experiences, confirming that this had been going on for months. The father felt a mix of emotions, relief that action was finally being taken, anger that it had gone on so long, and hope for the changes to come. Through it all, he maintained his composure, answering questions from investigators and providing additional context where needed. This wasn't about causing chaos. It was about ensuring every child could attend school, knowing they would be treated with dignity and respect. As he watched the officials continue their work, he knew that tomorrow would be different for his daughter and every other student in the school. Within 30 minutes of the authorities arriving, the school's usual quiet afternoon routine had transformed into a hub of intense activity. The father watched as police officers and school district officials moved purposefully through the hallways. The principal had called an emergency staff meeting, gathering all available teachers and administrators in the library while students remained in their classrooms. Parents began arriving in growing numbers, having received worried texts from their children about police cars in the parking lot. The front office was flooded with phone calls from concerned families wanting to know what was happening. The school secretary, overwhelmed by the sudden influx, had to call in additional help to manage the situation. The father stood in the main hallway, watching as more officials arrived. A team from the district's food service department had shown up, armed with tablets and clipboards, ready to conduct a thorough audit of the cafeteria operations. They wore serious expressions as they disappeared into the kitchen area, emerging occasionally to consult with health department officials. Through the library windows, he could see the emergency staff meeting in progress. Teachers sat in rows, many looking shocked as they learned about the situation. Some nodded in recognition. Perhaps they had suspected something, but hadn't known how to address it. Others appeared genuinely surprised, their expressions showing disbelief that such discrimination had been happening under their noses. The father's phone buzzed constantly with messages from other parents. Many shared similar stories. Their children had mentioned feeling uncomfortable during lunch, but hadn't been able to explain exactly why. Some parents admitted they'd noticed changes in their children's eating habits, but hadn't connected the dots. The pieces were finally coming together for everyone. A group of concerned parents gathered in the school's front lobby, sharing experiences and supporting each other. One mother broke down in tears as she described how her child had stopped eating school lunch months ago, but wouldn't tell her why. Another parent mentioned their child had been bringing extra food to share with friends, now understanding the real reason behind this generous behavior. The health department officials emerged from the kitchen with grim expressions. Their investigation had uncovered more than just discriminatory serving practices. There were serious violations in food storage and preparation that put all students at risk. The father's call had opened a Pandora's box of issues that needed immediate attention. School district representatives huddled in the corner of the lobby, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Words like immediate action and complete overhaul drifted across the space. The father caught fragments of their conversation about emergency meetings and policy changes. His simple act of speaking up was catalyzing changes beyond what he'd initially imagined. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the school windows as more officials arrived. Civil rights investigators interviewed staff members one by one in empty classrooms. The cafeteria workers, looking nervous and uncomfortable, were questioned about their roles and instructions. Some broke down, admitting they'd been uncomfortable with the practices but afraid to speak up. Outside in the parking lot, local news vans began arriving. The story was spreading quickly through the community. The father watched as the school's public relations officer tried to manage the growing media presence while maintaining the privacy and security of the students still in their classrooms. His daughter's class was on the second floor, and he caught glimpses of curious faces peeking out windows at the commotion below. He hoped she understood that sometimes doing the right thing meant causing a little chaos. Tomorrow, he would explain everything to her properly, helping her understand why this day had been so important. The superintendent arrived, looking harried but determined. She immediately called for an emergency school board meeting to address the situation. The father overheard her on the phone, demanding that all board members attend in person. This wasn't something that could wait for regular channels. Parents continued to arrive, some rushing from work still in their uniforms or business attire. The school's community was coming together, not in anger, but in determination to make things right. Conversations in the lobby shifted from shock and dismay to discussions about solutions and support for affected families. The civil rights investigators requested the father's documented evidence. His photos, videos, and notes would become part of their official investigation. They praised his thorough approach, noting how his careful documentation would make it easier to prove the systematic nature of the discrimination. As the afternoon wore on, the initial chaos began to organize itself into purposeful action. Task forces were formed, committees established, and immediate changes to cafeteria operations were drafted. The father watched as years of hidden discrimination began to crumble under the weight of exposure and official scrutiny. Through it all, he maintained his calm demeanor, providing information when needed and supporting other parents who were just learning about what their children had experienced. This wasn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It was about fixing a broken system and ensuring every child could feel safe and valued at school. The setting sun painted the sky orange as the first phase of the investigation wrapped up. Tomorrow would bring more changes, more questions, and hopefully the beginning of real solutions. But for now, the father knew he had done what needed to be done. He had shown his daughter and every other child in the school that standing up for what's right may be difficult, but it's always worth it. #True Life Story Outline. A father's shocking discovery. Part 1. An unexpected visit. Marcus Johnson, a devoted single father, had always been protective of his 8-year-old daughter Zara. Working long hours as a construction manager, he rarely had the opportunity to visit her during the school day. However, something felt off that morning, a gut feeling that prompted him to take an unexpected break from work and surprise his daughter at Oakwood Elementary School. Part 2. Entering the classroom. As Marcus approached Zara's classroom, he expected to see the typical lunchtime bustle. Instead, he was met with a scene that immediately set his heart racing. The teacher, Ms. Elizabeth Hartwell, was serving lunch, but something was terribly wrong. The food looked questionable, and the way it was being distributed seemed deliberately degrading. Part 3. The Lunch Revelation. Marcus watched in growing horror as he realized the lunch being served to the children, particularly the students of color, was dramatically different from what the white students were receiving. Zara's plate contained what appeared to be barely edible cold food, while other children had warm, nutritious meals. The stark contrast was impossible to ignore. Part 4. Confrontation and Observation. Unable to contain his anger, Marcus approached the teacher. His calm exterior masked the fury building inside him. Ms. Hartwell seemed uncomfortable, avoiding direct eye contact as Marcus asked pointed questions about the lunch distribution. The other children watched silently, sensing the tension in the room. Part 5. The 911 Call. With mounting evidence of what he believed was clear racial discrimination, Marcus made the controversial decision to call 911. His hands shook slightly as he dialed, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. He knew this call would change everything, not just for his daughter, but potentially for the entire school. Part 6. School Administration's Response. Within hours, the school principal and district superintendent were summoned. An internal investigation was launched, with Marcus providing detailed documentation of the lunch disparities. Zara sat quietly, both frightened and proud of her father's actions, unaware of the broader implications of what was unfolding. Part 7. Aftermath and Change. The next few weeks were a whirlwind nobody could have predicted. What started as a single dad's lunch break visit turned into something much bigger, a moment that would change not just one school, but how people thought about fairness in education. The local news picked up the story first. Reporters swarmed around the school, microphones ready, wanting to understand what had happened. At first, the school tried to brush things off, but the evidence was clear. Photos of the different lunches, witness statements from kids, and the dad's careful documentation spoke volumes. Community meetings became packed. Parents who had stayed quiet for years suddenly found their voices. They shared stories, some tearful, some angry, about similar experiences their children had faced. The lunch incident became a turning point, a moment when people realized small injustices can't be ignored anymore. The school district couldn't sweep things under the rug. They launched a full investigation, bringing in outside experts to review lunch programs, classroom practices, and staff training. It wasn't just about lunches anymore. It was about creating a fair environment for every single child. The dad who started it all? He became an unexpected community leader. People recognized him at the grocery store, in local meetings. Some thanked him, some were uncomfortable, but everyone was talking. His daughter, once shy and uncertain, now stood a little taller. She saw how one person, her dad, could make a real difference. Changes happened slowly but surely. New policies were put in place. Teachers received training about unconscious bias. Lunch programs were redesigned to ensure every child got the same quality meal, regardless of their background. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The most powerful change, though, was in the hearts of people. Kids started looking out for each other more. Teachers became more aware. Parents became more involved. That single moment in a school cafeteria had sparked something much larger than anyone could have imagined. Years later, people would still talk about that day. The day when a concerned father walked into a school and refused to accept anything less than fairness for his child. The day when a simple lunch became a catalyst for real, meaningful change. The daughter, now older, would often tell the story, not as a tale of victimhood, but as a story of hope. A story that showed how standing up, speaking out, and fighting for what's right can truly make a difference. Asterisk note: this is a fictional narrative inspired by real-world experiences of systemic inequality in educational settings. Asterisk.